I'm Radha Mistry, and you're listening to Future Feelings in collaboration with Deem Audio. The study, the science, and the art of understanding the unknown and preparing for the future has long been a preoccupation of humankind and is of particular concern to designers, especially as the stakes of our global present feel so high. As a designer with a background that spans architecture, narrative environments, and strategic foresight, I'm here to help you unpack the purpose and practice of futuring through 5 interviews with practitioners who approach this work in myriad ways. Now, let's jump right in.
I'm Anab Jain. I'm a designer, futurist, filmmaker, and educator, and I'm currently based in London in the UK.
And Anab, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, really excited to be able to speak with you today. For those of us who maybe aren't as familiar with the term futurist, and for those of us who maybe have our own definitions, how do you define what futurist looks like for you?
Sure. I have to be honest, I've been really reluctant to use that term for a long time because I'm not traditionally trained as a futurist, and the profession is well known and established, and it has a very rich history, and it is also well used in large corporations and governments to kind of help them navigate trends and sort of has more of a history around prediction and measure and probability modeling and stuff like that. And but over the years, the work we've been doing at my studio in Superflux is really also a form of futures, but it is more around design and art and experience and sort of bringing these more creative aspects into the work of futures. And I felt that as we were doing this work, it was important that this is also recognized as the work of a futurist. And I also felt a bit as an bit of an outsider in a quite traditionally quite kind of male and sort of a certain type of person was doing futures. And so I wanted to reclaim the term to be able to bring a more female, a more perspective of people of color into the work of futures.
No, and honestly, that really resonates with me. It's one of the reasons why I still don't call myself a futurist. I feel like it doesn't necessarily represent the versions of futurists that I have seen kind of before me. I call myself a designer. That's as simple as I can keep it right now.
Yeah.
But I had the pleasure of sitting on a panel with you and Brian David Johnson, Bruce Sterling, Julian Bleecker, Alex McDowell. We delved a little bit into design fiction and future studies. And one of the comments you had made about kind of your way in really resonated with me, which was that your way in was not through science fiction. And I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit more about, like, how did you even happen upon future studies and speculative design? Like, what was your path through from, like your earliest memory? Like, what's the thread that has kind of come from that all the way to like Superflux and, Design Studio of the Year and
It has been a very sort of unplanned journey. Like, I grew up in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in India, and I did not have any television. There was no access to kind of Western sort of literature, like popular science fiction books and films. And, we didn't have a TV in our house till I was 12 or something. And we only had one channel, the national channel in Hindi. So in a way, we were looking and reading a lot of sort of Indian myths and comics like Amar Chitra Katha, or epics like Mahabharata and Ramayana, and many such sort of stories and legends of multiverses and multi-species worlds, and it was very sort of, there were no boundaries, that this is a real world. And even on the streets and all around me, we were living, there were camels and there were cows and there were buffaloes, and everyone was just trying to figure out and navigate past this and feeding them. So in a way, I grew up in the context which was in some ways very non-constrained. And then I studied filmmaking, so I was also really interested in taking this. I was spending a lot of time in my own world building stuff from a very young age, and I went into doing filmmaking, and sort of the love for storytelling only grew. And I did sort of come to the UK to do what was called interaction design, but even then very influenced by Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby, who were just brought on board and were running the program called Design Interactions. And again, asking questions that were at top of my mind as well, like what are not just the potential applications of technology, what are the implications? What does it mean to live in a world where we have to relate to such technologies? For instance, that was one question. And so we were all thinking about the idea of the future in a much more sort of elastic, in a much more elastic way. You were exploring ideas about what the world would be like, not just through research and trends and horizon scanning, that was important, but also through poetics, through aesthetics, through critical thinking, through making and prototyping. And so you start to see the influence that story, materiality, prototyping, making something and touching and feeling it has a huge impact on how we think about the future, the decisions we make about the future. And I suppose that's the journey I'm still on with the work we do at Superflux. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. I think because so much of my way in was through design, architecture, making up story worlds, building imaginaries, coming up through architecture. And one of the things that I've heard you talk about time and time again is two things. One, this very kind of making led process of exploration and discovery. And two, kind of wrapping that, coming from this place of deep emotional engagement with futures. Why has that become, why do you believe that's such an important part of your practice? Why does that matter?
We over the years have found and learned and observed, and I would imagine have enough evidence to quite sort of quite happily make a big assumption that projections about the future as consumed by people today are not directly correlating to the action that we need to take about where we're at. So something is falling through the gaps. The mechanisms and tools that we have been applying to get us out of this problem that we are currently in are the same tools that we've used to get us into this problem in the first place. So I have seen that showing someone a graph and showing someone projections makes them realize that things are going to get bad, but it doesn't touch them to the point that they feel the need to act on it immediately or in the foreseeable near future. And I think we take an embodied approach to our practice. We are biologically wired in such a way that we consume stories and meet the world through stories and form opinions and navigate things through more tactile experiences. So I suppose fundamentally, if I can say that we are on a mission to leave a lasting legacy for the future of our planet and its custodians, that means we need to get anyone who has the slightest inclination to do the same work come on board. Whether we are working with businesses or government organizations or cultural institutes or academic partners, those who recognize that things are not going in that linear future trajectory where things will be fine, if we all can agree that the current trajectory that we're headed on is not fine and we need to do something else about it, really people can't see themselves in the future. They think of it as being someone else. So how can we sort of say, what if it was this possible, or what would it mean, in simple terms, what would it mean to step into a future, just one possible future, and experience the sort of world that you might find yourself in a particular space and time. Whom do you meet? Whom do you interact with? What do you use? What do you eat? Simple fundamental questions. And I found that the difference between sitting and trying to tell that to someone and taking them through that sort of a more embodied experience in however different means that you may want to do has a very different effect, and you will not be able to immediately measure. They're not going to return to their office and make phone calls about changing the business models immediately. But what it does, it starts to create memories in people's minds about other possibilities in a way that data doesn't do. So that's why I believe it's a very powerful form of features that we and many people we know practice. And I feel the problem right now is that it's still not being acknowledged as a powerful form of features because it questions and challenges a certain understanding of ways in which traditional decisions about our futures have been made. So in a way, we may have a shop window of being a design studio. We think that ours is a project of slow critical activism, but we're not on the streets with placards. We're trying to shift minds and hearts and souls one project at a time.
One of the projects that I feel like really did this probably in a very explicit way was mitigation of shock. And I'm wondering if you could kind of walk us through a little bit of, how that project came about and why that has felt so, why that has just felt like so important in this moment.
Yeah. So I suppose, John, who's the co-founder of Superflux with me and my partner, he was actually thinking about climate change and climate crisis and the denialism around it from way back in 2005 when he was doing his master's thesis at the RCA. And he had gone quite sort of dystopian and created a post-collapse civilization and that sort of kind of trajectory of thinking. But so it had been something we were talking about a lot after we set up Superflux a few years later. And we have our practice is sort of partly consulting and partly self-initiated, more experimental research projects. And we just felt we needed to do this. I suppose partly because our son was around 3 years time, and when you are thinking about the futures, and then you start thinking about these little people in front of you, and how easy it is to keep imagining not the first level, second level, but third level consequences of what their lives will be. You like, okay, let's really invest time in this. And so we started doing some very hands-on research and prototyping, starting to and recognize very quickly that climate change, like, what even is that? It's this absolutely amorphous, big sort of word that doesn't really sort of mean much to people as such, in a lived reality. And so we started asking a fundamental question that we felt people would relate to it, which is like, in a scenario where there is extreme weather events and where there's economic instabilities, what food will we eat? And we just simply, what food will we eat? How will we live it? What will our homes look like? And so that really triggered a series of very hands-on experiments. John and my other colleagues, who are far more skilled and equipped than I am, started building food computers from scratch, from found and discarded materials, really trying to understand how fundamentally are we prepared to change how we live here in the Western world if we were presented with this real crisis and had to learn to find other means of growing food or eating. And as we started doing this, we really kept that sort of idea of our then 4-year-old at that point in front of our eyes, thinking, if we were thinking of this home, could we imagine that he would be living in this home when he was our age? So that really took us into that space in the future where we could very directly imagine him living in this apartment and what that would mean. And that brought that sort of emotional sort of connection to the work. It wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It wasn't just an art project. It wasn't just a speculative design project. It was our project of really showing what we aren't doing, but also what we could do. And actually realizing that the biggest problem is that it is really difficult for people to imagine anything else than what things look like right now.
Yeah.
People are really very easily able to say what they don't like about now, but they really struggle with what the other thing could look like. And generally, the idea is that the other thing, whatever it will be terrible and scary because it's unknown. And so we just have to be here in this and protect this. And our project has been about, how do we poke holes at the world and give people a glimpse of this other and say that, we could thrive in this. We could actually be really happy. And what does that look like? And I suppose that was the context of mitigation of shock. And then, sort of obsessive details around making sure that this home comes to life in a way that whoever walks through the door can really start to see all the details of the newspapers and the radio show and the kitchen and the notes and the drawings and the recipes and the cookbooks and all these growing plants using just aquaponics and no water or soil to grow things quickly. How all these things together tell a story of a different future. Nowhere did anybody see the words climate change, food insecurity. These are the graphs. What are we going to do? They were able to take this in and leave, hopefully, with a very different understanding of what living in a climate-altered world could look and feel like.
Yeah, and I think there's something so powerful about, near future laboratory. Talk a little bit about this, about those mundane futures, right? About helping people to understand, like, what does breakfast look like? How does that change in the morning? Or like how you get your news, or whether you get to say hello to your significant other or your family member, whatever it might be. And I think this like scaling down of these very large, sometimes overwhelming global drivers tends to be probably the most effective way for people to be able to kind of like place themselves in these alternate versions of what might happen. And you did speak a little bit, right, to this kind of, there is this disassociative property that happens kind of the further out we go into future, where it feels less like a version of what our reality could be and more like a story we're reading about somebody else. And I think what was really effective and really beautiful about the way that mitigation of shock was presented was you actually did take an apartment and redesign it so people could walk into this alternate space. When you make projects like that, what is it that you're hoping to kind of, you know, and you spoke a little bit about people being able to kind of understand what other paths forward might look like, and to kind of help them envision that. But one of the questions I get asked a lot, maybe more in like a corporate foresight context, is what's the metric of success? And I hate that question. I'll say that right now. I hate that question. But I do sometimes like to reflect on like, what does it feel like to say, we did what we set out to do here?
Yeah. I mean, we get asked that all the time. And I use the word impact. We have to use it in our work. But I remember once, I don't know, was it Ursula Franklin? Someone said that, you know, a meteor about an impact is only most appropriate when you use it in the context of a meteor impact. And that's how the word started. And it's like, it generally causes destruction. So in terms of how do you measure impact is worth kind of having a twist on that. But, do you know, I cannot say, I do not have the numbers to say so many people change their minds after visiting this exhibition. Since we have shown it across many countries in many museums for 5 years, different versions of it. So there's obviously something that people are realizing that this is important to be shown in public spaces where, you know, we've had hundreds of thousands of people experience this work in different from Singapore and parts of Europe and North America and other countries where actually it was created for a Western context. We do get so many emails from people during COVID. They were like, oh my God, we visited it. And I immediately knew because I was trying to get food delivered and nothing was. And I was already starting to grow food after we'd seen this at home. And not that it was going to fill us up, but we knew what the consequences are. And so we do get so many such messages. But I think I want to flip that question and ask to the people who ask that question, what show us the metric of success of the projections and future forecasts that have been made so far? That's the metric of success I want to see, because I think that you could argue that if those other forms and other tools were successful, we wouldn't be in the mess we are in. So I think it is really time for people to open up their minds to the possibility that there are alternative, different, complementary tools and methods and approaches that could be really valuable if we have the political will and the corporate will to change things.
Yeah. And I think one of the, I love that. I wish I could bring that to like every CEO that I have to be in a room with. I don't know how well that would go over. But I do think it begs the question of kind of like rethinking our approach to who we center at the nucleuses of narratives around futures, right? And one of the things that you've talked quite broadly about is kind of shifting perspective from a human-centered approach to design to a more than human-centered approach to design, which when I've spoken with people about it, folks have said, oh, that's so provocative. And it's like, but it shouldn't be. It should be something that's just in our daily kind of vernacular. Can you share, where did that come from for you? And why, why does that feel like such a pertinent part of your practice?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and I do want to, before I even talk about it, acknowledge that, of course, this is age-old thinking. If you spoke to foresters or gardeners or poets and mothers and people, custodians of nature of different types, stewards of nature, if you like, are have been professing this idea for millennia, if you like, for as long as various communities of indigenous people whom I grew around near in India, but also in other parts of the world. But in my world of design, if you think, it's the object, it's the final product that you put out in the world, and that is the outcome. But when we were doing mitigation of shock, because we were growing so many things, and testing what works quickly, what can grow quickly, if we had emergency scenarios and stuff. And we were trying to grow these pink oyster mushrooms, and they just wouldn't grow. We put them in lots of different environments and stuff. And we sort of like, okay, fine, leave them here, and then move them here, move them there, and whatever. And then suddenly, months later, someone looked and was like, oh, look at this massive giant pink oyster mushroom had bloomed. And we were like, oh, what? Like, how, what? And then there was that moment, like, what happened? How? And then, recognizing. And it was around 2017, 2016, and I just finished reading Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Singh at that point. It had just come out, that book, I think. And it was clear, human disturbances are causing this mushroom to actually grow. We need humans to be part of it. But the real sort of trying to grow things not working, recognizing the capricious nature of things. That, we're so focused on the outcome, but actually we cannot control it. And spending so much time with things that we were growing around us as part of our work really brought me in very close contact with this sort of recognition that we can't continue in this human-centered way, and really made me reflect about the design position of advocating for human-centeredness for so long. And I completely do not want to suggest we shouldn't practice human-centered design, because of course we must, but it is kind of adding to that the idea that also consider a more than human-centered approach. And that was around 2018 that I was giving a talk at the Interaction Design Conference, where there was a lot of emphasis on human-centered. It was really to get practitioners to think about what might a more than human-centered perspective mean. And since then, the last 6-7 years, we've just sort of realized that the minute you're working with climate, and that's a lot of the work we do, you cannot separate it from biodiversity and nature. These aren't separate things. COP might think they are, but they're not. So we've been really trying to weave together these ideas into whatever we do. Yeah.
And I think it's, it's a lot of the ways that if you're kind of introduced to maybe like a non-Western approach to thinking about things, growing up, I didn't eat certain fruits and vegetables at certain times of the year because the earth did not provide them. Right. And that's just also what made sense for your body. It was the healthiest thing at that time of the year. And so the consideration of, other living entities beyond ourselves was always kind of top of mind. And so I think for some it can feel quite natural, but it does feel like in this moment, especially when we think about climate change and solutioning to climate change, that feels so critical as an approach to kind of addressing that.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, it's, you know, I was listening to, everyone knows Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's become, her book has become legendary. But I was listening to one podcast where she's trying to get her biology students, I think, to write about their love for the earth. And apparently they were struggling a bit. And then she said, but maybe think about, what if the earth loved you back? And that sort of flip and the provocation got them to really sort of open their minds to possibilities. And then ideas were flowing freely, and there was such sort of apparently beautiful work that emerged from the students. And it's kind of really stuck with me because we know it, we all know it, but we forget about it in our daily lives. And the earth, if the earth loves me back, then I have a bigger duty to love it back as well. Like, if I love it, it'll love me back. And that's sort of the it or she or they are all around us. Without them, we aren't. The minute you care about something and you love it, you will want to protect it. And that sort of is the fundamental shift in perspective. Yeah.
And you're in dialogue with all of these things around you, right? And
yeah.
So I did want to switch gears a little bit because,
Sure.
we're both educators as in one of the many things that we do. And I teach at a graduate architecture program here in Los Angeles, and I teach on their history and theory class. And one of the things that my class focuses on is future studies and speculative design. And one of the things that I always saw in my role as a designer was that, we have this responsibility and maybe this kind of like privilege to be mediators of future environments, right? And that comes with a lot. But it also means that, like, perhaps we can enact some change in our communities, upon the world. And I had kind of brought this idea to my students, and they, a good majority of them said that they don't feel like they have the ability to actually drive change. Which to me felt like I could feel their energy. It was like depleting, right? And these are kids that at the Southern California Institute of Architecture. It's a very kind of emergent kind of approach to architectural design and practice. But that felt disheartening. And I've been speaking about this with other kind of educators and practitioners. But I wonder if that's something that you're seeing in kind of an emerging generation of designers. But two, do you feel like the work we do and kind of an education in speculative design and future studies can help to remedy that a little bit?
Wow, that's a really good question. It's a mixed bag. I find on one hand that there is an overwhelming sense of hopelessness and a feeling of powerlessness amongst young people. And for very obvious reasons, they've been really messed around with. They are a generation begging for a future, and they cannot see one on the horizon. They cannot see one that feels like a truly radical vision that they can get behind. Where's the North Star? Who's driving it? So I feel on one hand that yes, there is that, but then on the other hand, I'm also seeing a lot more grit and determination from young people, my own students, interested in exploring these spaces and interested in using these tools and methods and approaches to show other possibilities. And I think we have seen, entirely new configurations of how young people want to be addressed, talked about, talked to, or with, or presented, or how they are represented, their own cultures, their identities. They have found platforms to be able to talk about these challenges. Tools of speculative design and futures, I think, I certainly feel that there's a huge growing interest for that, and I think that's because there is a recognition that if you can imagine it, you can create it, and you can do something about it. And the growing sense of discontent amongst young people who are equipped with these tools could mean there's hope for radical change. So I think that I almost see it as my responsibility as an educator to equip my students with all these methods and approaches and philosophies about how to think about an alternate future so that they can affect change in the present. All this work is so that they can start to implement that change today, so that that other future could actually be realized.
No, I love that. And I think one of the things that, my students kind of ask when they do learn about future studies is, well, how do we get into this? Like, how do we do this as a living?
Yeah.
And, all I can kind of do is like share my path in, which is very meandering and like very much stressed out my super immigrant Indian parents. And like, but to the young practitioner who's kind of perpetually curious, like, what would your advice be to kind of come into that? If you kind of had to think back to the way that you and John started Superflux.
Yeah, it's really tough to say that because I can't. I feel responsibility for young people who shouldn't, I can't just say, follow your dreams, because, follow your heart. And the reality is very different. They have to pay their bills and they have to pay rent. And so a lot of times my advice is to become really, really good at least one or few good skills when it comes to design skills. Make sure that you can find a way to earn a living, and do side hustles, do many more side hustles, do your own projects, start building your projects, start putting it out, start talking to people whom you want to question, go to places where you want to interrogate power, investigate the tools and methods that others have used in the past. So I think I do want to make sure that I don't give this kind of blind advice that just go and figure it out, and you don't have to worry about we lived very frugally. We both come from fairly frugal backgrounds initially, and in a way I don't have any sort of like shortcuts. It's still a struggle. It's not easy doing this practice. I don't necessarily want to even say my route was the ideal route. I do want to tell young people to not believe in the hype. I think that's really important, not to get carried away by the hype and not to get carried away. Like, really, the most important thing that they can do is think critically, question their own beliefs, question how they are consuming media and the influence it's having on them. I think above and over and above everything else, they will really need to hold power within themselves to be able to sort of dissect things happening around them in order to, and not get dissuaded and swayed around the kind of current opinionizing world. I don't know, whatever you call it, but yeah. The world.
No, and I appreciate that, because like I remember being, a recent grad coming out of architecture like 20 years ago. And, it was the top of the recession was at its height, and it was the worst time to be in construction. And, we kept looking to like all of these really shiny studios saying, my God, we want that. But the realities of doing that, right? Especially if you don't have an investor backing you or kind of the financial security, right? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's really hard. It's really, really hard. You're doing sometimes maybe work that feels a little soul sucking during the daytime. And then when you get home at dinner, like from that until you decide to go to bed, you're doing the stuff that feels more energizing. And like, that is the reality of it. And I think, you don't go from like zero to Superflex accolades, achievements, design studio of the year in a second. And I think so much of that journey is really marked by a spirit of curiosity and compassion. And so I just appreciate that you said that, because not a lot of people do.
Yeah. And I mean, my God, like, we started at the time when the credit crisis, 2008, which I think some of my best students may not even know about. But right now in the UK, we've been experiencing, and for obvious reasons, for horrific reasons, we have a cost of living crisis. It's impossible for young people to survive without having, jobs and work and employment of some form. So really, it is very challenging to be able to navigate the conditions around you, to be able to live in a time where war is being normalized, to be able to live in a time where the cultural propaganda machines are on full force, to find to make sense of it. So I genuinely think that reflecting, thinking, reading, observing, not believing in the hype, not getting swayed, but actually letting things come in and let ideas percolate. Really, the opposite of go, 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 go is what we need right now. And they have the luxury of time, and they should use that time, I think, to start to see, what is this? What's going on? Where, how are we as an entire generation being captured? What are we being captured by? How do we break out of this? And those are the bigger questions I really invite them to think about.
I wish that I had that advice like 20 years ago. That would have been really, because there sometimes feels like there's such an urgency to kind of like, to succeed in something instead of kind of having the space to question and explore. But I guess one of the things that I'm also just curious about is, what do you feel like is maybe most misunderstood or misaligned in the work that you do?
I think the misalignment is, at one level, it's the financial models and forecast and futures models. We need to decouple them. So they're deeply misaligned. If we are working within a set of predetermined conditions that are benefiting X number of shareholders that need to be met every time, it is very hard for any decision maker within the organization to then suggest something else, because at the end of the day, if everything that you're doing is to make sure that there's a certain idea of growth that continues, then that's one of the biggest misalignment that we've struggled with, is to be able to say that, well, actually, there are alternate business models, and there's a lot on the table now already, but it is deemed very risky. So a lot of the work is actually enabling that organizational change internally within organizations. How do you move from a place of insecurity and risk to a place of actually becoming an enabler of change. And I think so that's one big misalignment. And the other one I find is more around the misalignment between people's ideas of their own individual dreams, hopes, and futures for them and their loved ones, and what's happening in the world in terms of our collective futures. So that kind of everybody's like, oh yeah, I really planned this holidays and I'm going to do this and I've invested this money and it's going to be in this pension fund, and it's my children's graduation is going to be here, and I'm going to, and like planning their lives, their children's lives, 20, 30, 40 years, and looking around and going, oh shit, okay, yes, okay, what does 2 degrees mean? Okay, what like AI, okay, it's coming, these jobs that I'm dreaming may not even exist. Okay, that is a real misalignment, and that is the gap we really need to bring to close as well.
So in that line of thought, I guess, like, what's a future issue that you're either really excited about right now or just feels kind of like really important for you to be thinking about? What's kind of keeping you up at night, I guess?
Yeah. I think at the minute, there are these very sort of, John and I and a lot of us in the studio are wrangling with this idea of how minds have been captured. So we're trying to, people talk about multipolar traps, and people talk about all sorts of ways in which we're not able to, we can never remove ourselves from the system, and we can never really truly see ourselves outside of it. So what do we need to do to be able to not just try and see it ourselves? Is that even possible? But also, how can we show that we are captured to other people to the point that we are then able to show, oh, actually, there could be other. Because I think unless fundamentally we don't recognize that, it's really hard to implement truly alternate systems at scale. So there's something we're really interested in, thinking about things at scale and change at scale. And, what will it take and who will need to do this? There are piecemeal things, a lot of people talking about ideas around degrowth, a lot of people contesting that idea, a lot of people talking post-growth. No, it's not called degrowth. No, it's called post-growth. Fine. All of that is great. We need counter-narratives in and amongst everything. But when I really go into into a business meeting where, say, I'm talking to a technology company, and then it is still very much, more devices, more products, more and recycling is make sure there are more recycling bins in the offices. Only 1% of the plastic that we're putting in the bins here in the UK is actually getting recycled. We are in so much trouble. It's so messed up. I don't even know how to wrap my head around. I hold pieces of things in my hand going, where should I put this? And I started to hold loads of plastic bubble wrap envelopes in the studio, and things are feeling paralyzed, because we did a lot of research recently around circularity and material circular. And it's just, it's a trap, I think. So I think it's really thinking through some of these big questions.
I think it was in an interview where you said that the way that John, your partner, sometimes describes what you do is that you design questions. How do you decide what question to focus on? Because there's so many out there.
Yeah. Don't know. It's really hard. And I suppose that's also my sort of pedagogical approach at design investigations that I teach is to enable my students to learn to ask better questions or design questions. But I suppose it's a conceptual framing in some ways to say we're designing questions to open up the possibility space. if you come with a brief to which you want a solution, that space of possibility has already been reduced. So even when we get briefs, sometimes we try and get them to become questions, in order to open up things that have not yet been explored at one level. The other thing is we hold on to quite a few questions, and they're not really ever really written out, but they're more like themes or ideas, and it is loose enough and ambiguous enough to allow things to fall in and out of it. So I think it's more about if we step outside of solutionism, then we become critical thinkers, and in many ways let the AI give us the solutions and let us as humans focus on the questions.
That sounds like a beautiful world. I would love that. I'm done with solutioning.
I mean, I'm not, if my computer doesn't work, I want a solution. So
for sure.
Just to be like clear, it's the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I guess like my final question is, and I preempt this by saying that I know, everyone's practice evolves, and like the things that feel most pertinent kind of change over time. But like in this moment, what feels like a fantasy project that you would like to do?
We want to work with not so much a specific project, but with the idea that who wants to come on the journey with to make the change. And I then will not be picky as much as, if a big business who has been responsible for a lot of the, say, carbon emissions, want to do, what is my role? And this is something we grapple with in terms of the ethics of it all the time in the studio. And this is something like, where is the intent? I really want to understand if the intent is there and if you can see the desire to shift. But I want to work with those who want to, because I think unless we get big players on board, nothing much will change. So I think I'm interested in having conversations with those big players, if possible. And on the other hand, at a very intellectual and artistic and conceptual space is the space of poking holes at the system and showing these alternate perspectives to kind of, again, catalyze public imagination at across scale. I say all this sitting here. Most days in the studio and home, and I teach and I run the studio, and it's just firefighting, and we're a small team, and we're just trying to do the things and scrambling, moving along. So when I sit back and reflect on it, but I don't want to give the impression that I'm just sort of having all these ideas and have all this time to experiment. I wish.
Yeah. That's why I've been asking everyone that question, because I think oftentimes we don't have the chance to kind of like just reflect and say, in an ideal world, what would I love to do in this conceptual space of practice, And so it's sometimes a luxury to be able to think about that.
Absolutely.
Well, Anab, I just wanted to, again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining and for imparting some wisdom and just some of your experience with us today.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the questions, and it just helps create the space to reflect and think. So thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Future Feelings in collaboration with Deem Audio.
You can find our other 5 episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google, as well as explore Deem's podcasting program at deemjournal.com/audio. To keep up with my work, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Radha_Mistry.